The North Gauteng High Court has ruled that President Cyril Ramaphosa's recognition of King Misuzulu KaZwelithini in terms of the Leadership Act is unlawful and invalid.
It also says the judgment is not about who should be AmaZulu King.
The court was asked to determine whether King Misuzulu had been appointed in terms of the Zulu custom, and secondly, whether the president had correctly recognized the king in terms of the Leadership Act.
And Dr. Fikile Vilakazi is an analyst who joins us live now. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Vilakazi. Firstly, your reaction to the ruling.
Good evening, Bongiwe and Imani. It's shocking. Shocking. I think it's something that has never happened in our history of the royal just customary ruling. So it's I think it's landmark decision, just in terms of the role of the courts and the role of the royal family in relation to decision making within these institutions that we call royalty. So it's setting us up perhaps into a new era, an era that I would imagine, if you look at the history of royalties in basically globally, one could perhaps even begin to say maybe this is an era of the demise of some kind of what we are calling royalty in South Africa. And I think on the African continent, we know that there are challenges, Bongiwe and Imani, in relation to the existence of the monarchy, the role of the monarchy. We can see Eswatini also, we have challenges. Eswatini and South Africa, in Southern Africa being probably the only royalties that we see. So that's the one thing for me. I think this judgment could be signaling that we are moving towards that era where we are going to see the power of governments overcoming the power of what we call royalty in this particular instance within the Zulu kingdom. So it could be a thing like that. And I think it's shocking, but not surprising as well, because of the challenges that we've seen after Umdwana Kapindangene passed away, and the fact that that affidavit, fellow South Africans, as you know, was never really signed. And I personally did suspect and anticipate that this is probably likely to be the trajectory of this case.
As you say, some important things there, that the concept of royalty, royal families are going to potentially be propelled into a new era. Let's go back then to what the judgment was determining, that it's not about, in fact, of what the application was. It wasn't about who should be king of the AmaZulu. The applicants didn't ask the court to do that, but what they wanted to know was King Misuzulu appointed in terms of Zulu custom, and was he correctly recognized, the present king, in terms of the traditional and Khoisan Act and so on. And this is a big deal in terms of the presidency and its culpability, in inverted commas, in perhaps not following this process. What do you make of that? This is a big moment to be found wanting potentially.
I absolutely agree. Bongiwa, I think for the presidency, obviously it is a call to revisit the customary legislation in the country, customary policy frameworks, whether indeed the presidency didn't follow protocol. But I just want to remind us actually what happened there. You remember, in terms of customary practices of AmaZulu, the Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the late, has a particular role as the Prime Minister, had that particular role as a Prime Minister to preside over matters of the will that transpired. And we know that within the Zulu kingdom, he has that role, and that is a customary practice. And that meeting, in the manner that it was convened, in my view, fellow South Africans and Bongiwe and Imani, was convened in terms of the customary practices of AmaZulu. Is something that has happened even before, when the late KaZwelithini was alive. The late prince played that particular role. So argumentation then can point to a fact that that is a customary space. And if it is true that we agree that that meeting was a customary arrangement, then it could be that perhaps our courts are not reading into the situation correctly. It can be contested to say the president only was invited to endorse a process that had already occurred customarily. So that's the one perspective. And if you look over time, the arguments are already there on the floor to say the process that was followed was based on the will. And in fact, customarily, even without the will, customs do suggest and dictate that when you are born outside of wedlock, as we've been saying in the case of Umdwana Usmagade, you don't necessarily have the rights to inherit the throne. And I think that is what Umdwana Kapindangene followed here. So be that as it may, then, that's something that I think will need to stand contested within a court of law. And of course, issues of the coming in of our legislative processes customarily here also then kick in. It's a question of saying who has power in terms of decision making here. Is it the customary arrangements like that meeting that was presided by Ingos Umdwana Kapindangene, or should the courts be pronouncing on this matter? And I think for me that is what is at stake here. Yeah. And in my view, I think the president really just came to endorse a customary process that already was unfolding, and we stand to be corrected, of course, given the judgment of the court in this case.
And I suppose it's going to be quite the big one, especially when you think about that mediation panel that the president was also talking about, and the court saying that, but that mediation panel was not an investigating committee, especially when you look at what is, to happen with regards to the Leadership Act. But there's something else I'm keen to pick your brain about. I mean, earlier on we had Prince Mbonisi on the show, and he says that they're going to, wait for the lawyers and also speak as the family as to what happens now with this particular matter. So do you foresee that the family will be united in this particular matter, or will it depend who you speak to within the family to see how a way forward is to be charted?
To be honest with you, Bongiwa, I foresee that there's probably going to be more division. However, what we could say to the Zulu kingdom and the Zulu family is that maybe this is a time to regroup. This is a moment, if they can utilize this judgment as a moment to reconnect and regroup. My suspicion is that I think if an appeal is posed to the court, chances are that this decision could be reversed. But I think the courts are not necessarily deciding who the king should be. I think that's the one thing I must point out. The courts are actually mediating in this particular case, if you read the judgment correctly, to say the Zulu kingdom needs to sort its own house, needs to put its house in order with as less as interference as possible from the state in the form of the presidency. And I think it's just giving an opportunity then, before the elections, I want to imagine, for this matter to be resolved. So it could be that it may bring the Zulu King family together in that sense, if they look at it from that perspective, or it could even further draw them apart depending on how they engage on it. But I think if they engage on it from the perspective of emotions, like it has been the case, it's a highly emotive matter, it may draw them apart. It has never happened in the Zulu kingdom that the king could be unseated by a court of law in this case, or possibly be seen to be unseated, because I don't think it's an unseating. I think it's a question of saying, sort your house in order, social cohesion is important here, rebuild and regroup and take charge as a Zulu nation. We don't want to necessarily get involved as courts, but we have been invited to interpret here, and our interpretation is that perhaps the president may have entered prematurely or maybe incorrectly in this particular instance, but do resolve the matters and let us know as a nation. I am reading it in that manner, Bongiwa.
Dr. Vilakazi, just a final thing. As you say, if it doesn't unite, there are a number of other things, existential threats it could face in this moment. It could break up, there could be, disunity. It could potentially even disintegrate in the long run. What does the AmaZulu nation do tonight in the presence of this judgment in terms of understanding who their leaders are, while the different members of the royal family figure out what their next step is going to be, and whether the king decides if there's going to be, or whether we might hear from the presidency as well, a legal challenge? What should the nation be doing tonight? What should their thinking be like?
It's quite a hard one. It's quite a hard one in the height of elections. But I will imagine, I think the Zulu King Ingonyama probably needs to respond, speak to the nation to say, what does this judgment mean in relation to the role of Ingonyama? But I also imagine that Ingonyama may not be given that opportunity to pronounce, because he may no longer be seen as Ingonyama as we speak, given the outcomes of the court. So there's that. And I think to really hold the space of cohesion together, perhaps the president presidency would be in a better place here to pronounce in terms of what then next is going to happen in relation to the judgment of the court, and giving Ingonyama a chance to regroup maybe themselves, within the kingdom. That's what I imagine is going to happen. But I think within the kingdom, there's going to be a demand through the committee of elders or people that really are close to Ingonyama and the other faction to say the Ingonyama must unseat in the throne based on the judgment until a further process has been followed. So I anticipate that will happen between tonight and tomorrow. And this is just something that we just need to watch the space and see, Bomiwe and Iman.
And, one of the things that you talk about, of course, is, just how the family, whether or not it can come back together or it can, it can disintegrate further. But there's something else that was, part of the argument in court. And I wonder how much of this, may play a role in how they work on this issue going forward. And that is the principle of ukungena eseswini, ukufakwa eseswini. And remember, this was also part of what Prince Magate was arguing in court, saying that this principle is making him the rightful heir to the throne. Do you think that could count at all when the family discusses how this issue goes forward?
It will. I mean, it will matter. The power of ritual is a very, very sensitive matter. And you would remember that leading towards the throning of Ingonyama, there's been contestation of rituals that were performed by both the current Ingonyama and Umntwana Usmagade. So when they really look into this matter now, given the court, they would have to, of course, revisit the rituals that were performed by both, I would call them, for lack of a better word, candidates, respectfully. How then did they follow the path of ritualing for someone that needs to be put into the throne as a king? And of course, Princess Magade is likely to argue that he also followed similar rituals that Inkosi Misuzulu also did. Yeah. So he may then argue that he's ready. He's ready. He's done. He's done it. He's more or less, in his view and in the view of his faction, ready to take the throne. So there may be pressure for Ingonyama then to give space and say, let Inkosi that we see as Inkosi AmaZulu take the throne until further notice, or perhaps let there be a moment of a vacuum of some kind. There may in the Zulu kingdom we may need someone to act Ibambela Nkosi, something that we call Ibambela Nkosi once this issue is resolved. So it may be that then the kingdom may need to appoint Ibambela Nkosi until such time that these issues are resolved, so that then it is not Umntwana Usmagade neither Inkosi Misuzulu that is on the throne, but kube nomuntu ozobamba until such time that the situation is resolved.
There can't be a vacuum. And we also, the mirroring of those processes almost parallel those rituals being undertaken by both. So that was certainly interesting. Yeah. We would have asked, had we time, Fikile, about how the process that flows, the investigative committee and so on, in terms of what time frame we're looking at for a resolution of these matters. But it's a conversation that we'll hold over the next couple of days and we'll see how it develops. Thank you for your time tonight, Dr. Fikile Vilakazi, just sharing and reflecting that North Gauteng judgment today. As she said, unprecedented, a big moment for the royal house.
And we'll continue to look at this particular story in the coming days. We heard even from a legal analyst who says there's a chance that this may just be appealed. So let's see then what happens.